Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel Eclectic Reads. Ever since I learned that AI was coming for publishing, I thought about one of my favorite short stories, The Great Automatic Grammatizator by Roald Dahl. When I was a child, I was obsessed with Roald Dahl's children's books and short stories, and in fact, I think that I've read all of his children's books and short stories. He writes stories just like his children's books that delve into the macabre and have this delicious twist at the end. If you have never read any of his short stories, I would recommend starting with Lamb to the Slaughter. It is perfect for Halloween. Also, The Man from the South and The Landlady are also classics. I know that many of these stories are taught in middle schools and high schools in the United States at least. I'm sure they're also taught in the UK. This video will include spoilers, so if you haven't read The Great Automatic Grammatizator, I would go out and read it first, save this video, and watch it later. The story was first published in 1954 in a collection called As You Like It. It was then republished in a collection published posthumously. In the United States, the title of that collection is The Umbrella Man, and in the UK, the title is the same as this story's title, The Great Automatic Grammatizator. The story follows two men, Mr. John Bolin, who runs an electrical engineering firm, and his brilliant employee, Adolf Knipe. At the start of the story, Bolin congratulates Knipe for helping invent what is essentially a supercomputer that can make complex mathematical computations. He says, "I don't think I have to remind you that your own contribution, especially to the original plans, was an important one. In fact, I might go so far as to say that without you and some of your ideas, this project might still be on the drawing boards today." However, Knipe doesn't seem to share Bolin's enthusiasm. As it turns out, he's only working at the electrical engineering firm to pay the bills. His real dream, as he eventually tells Bolin, is to be a best-selling author. He dreams of being able to quit his day job and, like many people in AuthorTube, be a full-time author. But he can't seem to make headway on his story. And so when he goes home, he's staring at his typewriter, trying to find the words. And then suddenly, he has an idea. Why can't he create essentially a supercomputer to write stories in the way that he had created a supercomputer to make complex mathematical calculations? English grammar is governed by rules that are almost mathematical in their strictness. Given the words and given the sense of what is to be said, then there is only one correct order in which those words can be arranged. Now, Knipe concedes that grammar is more complex than math. There isn't necessarily one right answer. However, upon reflection, he realizes that actually it is more like math than we might think. There are tropes, grammar does follow certain rules, and so maybe this is actually possible. Knipe then spends an entire evening scouring books and magazines for words and names that he can use to program his machine. This is very similar, by the way, to how machine learning works. AI will scour the internet and use that information to then produce its own content. This is why we talk about AI plagiarizing, because they're stealing from actual people's work. Here is how the story describes Knipe's work. The living room became littered with sheets of paper, formulae and calculations, lists of words, thousands and thousands of words, the plots of stories, curiously broken up and subdivided, huge extracts from Roget's Thesaurus, pages filled with the first names of men and women, hundreds of surnames taken from the telephone directory, intricate drawings of wires and circuits and switches and thermionic valves, drawings of machines that could punch holes of different shapes in little cards, and of a strange electric typewriter that could type 10,000 words a minute. Also a kind of control panel, with a series of small push buttons, each one labeled with the name of a famous American magazine. Knipe then rushes into Mr. Bolin's office, tells him that his dream has always been to be an author, and furthermore, if Mr. Bolin agrees to adopt this machine that he is inventing, he too can become this wealthy author, actually a publishing company. And what we come to learn, maybe this is the most surprising part of this story, is that at one time, authors actually could make a living publishing articles in large magazines. And in fact, Roald Dahl started his career by writing for the Saturday Evening Post. Gone are the days when that was actually a reality. I don't think anybody is making a living by just publishing, even weekly, in magazines. I don't think that's the case anymore, unfortunately. Once Bolin comes on board, he and Knipe start sending out these machine-written stories to major magazines. And for some reason, Knipe is finding more success. His stories are being accepted more frequently than Bolin's, which causes Bolin to think that maybe Knipe has been cheating him all along. And the reader wonders that too, because it's not always clear why it is that Knipe's stories are more successful, but since Knipe is the one who invented the machine, I would imagine that he did actually mess with the machine a bit to favor him. In any case, this is how the machine works. So you see on my machine, by having an adjustable coordinator between the plot memory section and the word memory section, I am able to produce any type of story I desire simply by pressing the required button. This is, in Knipe's words, a commercial proposition. There are common tropes in literature that can be used to make the story more marketable. Something that, of course, every self-published author will tell you. You need to include tropes that readers want, right? It is at this point in the story that Dahl introduces some irony. Knipe tells Bolin that one way that stories can feel real is by inserting huge words into the story. This is, incidentally, kind of like how AI inserts em dashes into the story to make it feel more professional. So that is the argument that Knipe makes. And Bolin asks, well, how do you do that? Here is what it says in the story. In the word memory section, he said, apexegetically, this adverb, apexegetically, makes me wonder whether this entire story is not also a product of the Great Automatic Grammatizator. Bolin and Knipe start courting authors to see whether they would agree to sign contracts giving their names to Bolin's publishing company so that they could publish stories under their own name. And presumably, these authors would then get a cut of the sales. The first two authors, who are incidentally men, reject the proposition. They're like, absolutely not, and they just push away Bolin and Knipe. The third writer, a female writer of romances, agrees to the proposition when she realizes that the stories that the machine can create are actually better than her own stories. She's actually quite a mediocre writer. Leave it to Dahl to insert a delicious dash of misogyny in his stories. It is, however, noteworthy that the authors who do end up signing on to Bolin's scheme are mediocre writers of pulp fiction. And so while I argue that the story is very prescient in predicting machine learning and the use of AI in the publishing industry, in its own time, I think the story was also meant to be a satire on the production of pulp fiction and these mass-produced romances that were all following a certain formula. And Dahl was part of that industry. As I said, he started out by writing for magazines and producing stories quite frequently. As Knipe himself says, authors could make a good living from doing just that. The argument that is made in the Great Automatic Grammatizator is that mediocre writers are the ones most susceptible to AI, and actually probably the ones that can be best replaced by AI. And as AI becomes more and more intelligent, that is the fear, is that the mediocre writers are going to resort to AI to make sales. The story ends by breaking the fourth wall. The author tells the reader that he too is tempted to sign on to this scheme. Here's what he says. This very moment, as I sit here listening to the howling of my 9 starving children in the other room, I can feel my own hand creeping closer and closer to that golden contract that lies over on the other side of the desk. Give us strength, O Lord, to let our children starve. The dramatic nature of these last lines make me think that maybe the story itself is intended to be read as a product of the Great Automatic Grammatizator. It includes a lot of the tropes that we would think of in some of the most dramatic stories. An author has 9 starving children in the next room. The exclamation, "Give us strength, O Lord." I just love how the story itself is very meta. In recent months, there have been quite a few videos about the quality of the recent publishing industry, that the quality has plummeted. There have been many videos about this. I will link them down below. This morning, I watched a video by Samantha at Thoughts on Tomes about the lack of developmental editing in the publishing industry. and how that is also fed by the fact that readers don't care. They don't care that their books are sloppy. They don't care that they're not edited. They don't care that the stories aren't of good quality. And therefore, the publishers are not going to care either. And they're laying off editors, and the editors that are left are being worked so much that the quality of the books have just gone down precipitously. Well, if that's the case, then what is preventing the publishing industry from embracing AI full scale? Publishing AI books with AI narrators, edited by AI and marketed by AI. Roald Dahl's story suggests that mediocrity and desperation lead to exactly this. I too am disgusted by generative AI and how it's being used in the creative industry. In fact, I recently started a Facebook group for crochet that explicitly bans AI crochet. I am the one who has to accept every single post because I was getting so tired of AI crochet. And there are people who are publishing AI generated crochet patterns that are at this point really terrible, but machine learning is going to get better. And it's really disturbing to me. But in a capitalist world where the consumer calls the shots, if we are not going to hold publishers to a high standard and designers to a high standard, this is what we're going to get. And it seems like right now, readers might be okay with it. The reason why AI generated audiobooks are selling is because readers are okay with it. They're okay with poorly edited books. They're okay with all of this. AI isn't great yet, but it will eventually compete with mediocre human authors. And until we hold publishers to a high standard, the dystopian world that Dahl wrote about over half a century ago is going to be our reality. And I believe that this story is precisely what everyone in the publishing industry needs to be reading at this time. Thank you everybody for watching, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.